Dr. Eric Haseltine is an author, futurist, and neuroscientist. He is former director of research at the National Security Agency, executive vice president at Walt Disney Imagineering, associate director and CTO for national intelligence at the Federal Office of the Director of National Intelligence, and a director of engineering at the Hughes Aircraft Company. Eric, in addition to your credentials at the NSA, I understand you were a psychologist. We do our research here. I'd love to get your read on our national psyche right now, how it relates to voting and security, and I'm wondering if there's a connection and maybe why people might be resistant to online voting today.
The way I would assess the national psyche right now when it comes to elections is lack of trust. Lack of trust that someone isn't going to try to mess with the election as they did in 2016. And we're hearing reports from the intelligence community and elsewhere that that's going on right now. A lack of trust that the voting system is secure from other issues. And then there's the issue of disease. If I go vote, am I going to pick up a virus? So I think people are very nervous about voting, and there's a lot of concern about trust. Can you trust the system?
I think independent of the health issue, trust in general, it's always been interesting to me because, our census can be done online. We can send millions of dollars over wires online. Why is voting so different in your mind?
I think there's something really fundamental about voting to our democracy and in the American psyche. Voting is a very cornerstone of our country, and it's sacrosanct. So I think that it has a special place in our mind, and the level of security that people would like to have to secure our democracy may be higher than other things.
So from your background of directing research at the NSA, I'm sure you've been privy to lots of conversations about hacking. We saw the misinformation campaign, in some cases attempts to hack our voter registration list in 2016. In every tech category from finance to healthcare, we've managed to develop a system for managing that risk. Based on your background and what you've witnessed across critical infrastructure like this, do you think there's a solution for voting?
I do believe that electronic voting can be secure. There is no system, including our nuclear launch codes, that's 100% bulletproof. The key in modern security is to operate under the assumption that you've been compromised so that you can detect it quickly, isolate it when it does happen, and fix it quickly. And that's really state of the art. And because of my knowledge about how these things are done, I've seen it done, it works very well, and I don't have any concerns at all that we can vote securely. In fact, and I would go so far as to say that electronic voting is probably more secure than the paper ballot or kind of voting we have right now electronically.
Before we move on to anything else, let's talk about Iowa. You and I know that wasn't really a voting app that caused all this stir, but it really scared people, obviously.
That wasn't so much a voting app issue as it was a reporting of the votes issue. As to, do we know what happened and will we ever know? Absolutely. It's the same thing that happens when you have any failure. It's a human element. At some point in the chain, a human didn't set it up right, didn't specify the right thing, didn't operate it correctly. So people tend to focus in the electronic realm on the technology, but having been what you'd think of as a bad guy or a burglar in this space, what we always focused on to exploit a target was the human element. And that's the piece that gets under recognized. So I can say without fear of contradiction that the problem in Iowa and all the other problems that we've had at their root is a human vulnerability.
Be a lot easier if it weren't for those pesky humans, I guess. And I always thought of the NSA as the good guys, I guess.
Well, we always like to think of ourselves that way. We aren't always painted that way in the press. We're hackers for God and country, I guess you could put it that way. But because we do that, and we're the best in the world, and we go up against the best in the world, we know what can be done and what can't be done, what can be guaranteed and what can't be guaranteed. And that's why I say that the state of the art right now is to say this system sooner or later probably will be compromised in some way. How do we set it up so that when that happens, and if that happens, we're still going to be okay?
Makes sense. So I've heard different versions outlining how we might move forward here, with voting. Some say it should be academia-led, open source, and build a technology that way, or that the state should own the technology and build it from scratch, which LA tried to do, and they've had some issues. And now there's a more recent one given the urgency. It's asking tech companies to source ideas, maybe coordinating through the federal government and build from there. What do you think is the most likely path forward here for voting?
Well, open source takes a long time to get people's agreement. Usually what happens is someone who has a lead becomes the de facto standard. And then over time, that becomes not open source, but maybe open interface so that there can be interoperability. What's under the hood doesn't have to be the same in each of these electronic voting systems. They just have to be able to interoperate and communicate. And that's what I think is going to happen. You're going to see one or two market leaders be brought in right away because we really don't have a choice. And then there will be pressure to standardize the way those things communicate with each other and with the larger system.
So here's something I just totally fail to understand sometimes. I love tech. I spend my career in tech. I see lots of secure systems. I believe Americans love tech for everything, except there seems to be this one exception where there's real drama around voting. Can America start to love tech for voting?
It's inevitable. It's going to happen. What aspect of our life hasn't gone digital? And if you think about ordinary dumb objects like monkey wrenches, there's a company, Black & Decker, that now has an electronic internet connected wrench. We have smart toilets. Every single thing that used to be dumb atoms now has bits and connectivity to it. And so it's inevitable. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when and how.
I tend to agree with you. You wrote an op-ed recently that said we should continue to do these tests and pilot things around voting. There's not as much time for pilots now, though. So should every piece of tech be considered? And my peers in Silicon Valley are coming together like crazy, and there's, as you say, tech for everything. So do we just need to jump in head first here, given the situation?
Yeah, if I were in charge, I would say let's find the best one or two, get the best white hat hackers we can, attack the heck out of it, really beat it up, find its holes, and get it working as fast as possible. And continue to do that. That's the thing about penetration testing and white hat exercises. They can't stop once they're done with the initial attack. They have to keep it up 24/7, actually. A project that I started with Stratcom, those are the nuclear weapons people, was to do essentially 24/7 social engineering and external attacking so that the employees knew that they were being watched 24/7. And if they responded to a phish or did something they shouldn't do, they're going to get a knock on their door within minutes. And that's what we're going to have to do, 24/7 testing all the way through the election. I think the question, if I were an average person, is how do I know that it's safe? I just have the word of experts in the government who I don't happen to trust very much that it's safe. And it's so arcane and sophisticated that is there anything that could really give me comfort? And I think that's an incredibly important question. It isn't the fact of security, it's the appearance of security. This goes back to my Disney experience. I think we need really good storytellers who know how to get the message across. And actually, they didn't appeal so much to the mind as the heart. And this is a very difficult thing for technologists because we tend to be in our heads, we tend to be cognitive, but people aren't persuaded by logic and facts. People are persuaded by feelings and emotion and desire and hope and fear. And I think that's the route that has to be taken. And I think between now and November, that's the most important thing to be done.
Do you think that ever gets politicized, where someone that's just against online voting for whatever reason, tries to create that lack of trust? Or do you think that that's just the default state that we're in and we've got to work through it?
I absolutely think it'll get politicized. How can it not? After all, it's about politics. And clearly, there are some who really are not going to benefit from electronic voting. Without mentioning any names, one party historically is underrepresented at the polls because people in that party have other life issues and they don't get to the polls for any number of reasons. If we lower the barrier to entry so that anybody could vote really easily, I think it's clear that one party is going to benefit over the other, and you can just bet your bottom dollar that it's going to get fought tooth and nail.
So what's the counter argument there? I mean, if you're in that other party, why do you think that this is a thing we shouldn't do?
I think that if I were in that other party, and I actually am in that other party, The way I would look at it is to say, this is an opportunity, not a threat. And the key is, since it's inevitable, sooner or later it's going to happen. Rather than fighting it, let's get out ahead of it and see how we can surf that wave rather than be drowned in that wave.
No one would know better than you, Eric. Thanks for taking the time to talk to us today.
Well, you know what? It's a really important subject. I really appreciate being asked to weigh in.